Okay, I'd like to welcome everyone to the second session where we're discussing the LocalWiki. At an earlier session, we had a presentation by Philip who spoke about the history and the current situation at a national and international level, and Brian Zelp reported on the LocalWiki activity in Toledo, Ohio, and in Champaign, Urbana. And as we know, this is really a discussion of the experience of the LocalWiki in the Midwest. And so our next presenter is going to present on the Ann Arbor wiki, Edward Vielmetti. And then after Ed speaks, Rubayya Hoque will speak on the CU experience out of Gislis at the University of Illinois School of Information and Library Science. Ed.
Thanks for having me here. I want to talk about ArborWiki. ArborWiki is a project which started in 2006. Like every project, has its own origin story, so I'll go through that briefly. ArborWiki started out as a confluence of a couple events in a relatively modest-sized Midwestern college town. One was a project started by a fellow named Matt Hampel as his high school senior year class project to do a wiki about his city. And so when he started it, he completed his coursework, graduated successfully, and the school system told him, now that you've graduated, it's time to take your server down because you're done with what you're doing. So Matt, being not only civic-minded but also technically savvy, was able to lift up the work that he had done and move it over to a subdirector of a server that he ran himself. If that hadn't happened, I wouldn't be here today. Another piece of the origin story is that about that same time, I was working for a commercial wiki company called Social Text. I was one of the founders, and I had been experimenting with doing local information on a private server of my own. So when I found this project, it was the aha moment. It's like, oh, I'm not the only person thinking about how to have digital virtual representation of my city online. It's something else I can do. Over the lifespan of the ArborWiki project, so since 2006 to 2013, we've accumulated about a dozen people who I would think of as the core of the project. Some of them are frequent contributors, some of them are the technical support people. We've gotten support from the Ann Arbor District Library, which is where the server ended up after taking it over after Matt moved it there. The site has upwards of 10,000 pages on it. There was a burst of activity for about 18 months while I was working for the local newspaper, where I was regularly using ArborWiki to augment my memory of what was going on in the city and creating pages more frequently than anyone else during that time. And the question really becomes, why would you do a project like this? We've heard a bunch of reasons why people have started this up, but I had come from a wiki background, so it wasn't a big stretch for me to do something local. And there was a real demand for community information. And I think, although it wasn't clear at the time, it became more clear over time as about halfway. So in 2009, the local newspaper shut down and went from a 7-day publication, it was a daily paper. They closed the old newspaper down, sold the building, started up a new organization that only published 2 days a week with a much reduced staff. And then there's the question of, okay, how are we going to have a memory of what's happening in our community if we don't have any reporting of what's going on in our community? So there was that was sort of a big challenge of like, oh, we're no longer able to just clip news articles out of the local newspaper. We're going to have to actually be the primary front lines of keeping track of what's happening in city council or whatever. So I want to think about a couple of things about LocalWiki. One is that unlike Wikipedia, which people might be familiar with, it's not really about notability. Anything that's local enough, if it has enough locality, it's relevant for what we're doing in ArborWiki. So as I like to use the example, the indifferent quality buffet restaurant that closed down in your favorite strip mall is still notable enough to deserve an entry in ArborWiki. Maybe not a very long one, maybe not a very thorough one, but it's part of the fabric of town, and if you ever want to refer to it in 2 years, because it's part of a bigger story that you haven't discovered yet, there's a spot for it. The second is that it tries to take a local point of view on the world rather than a global neutral point of view on the world. So unlike Wikipedia, which counsels you not to have any kind of personal information or original research, we depend on original research, original restaurant reviews, original research into history of various things, because we can't count on there being a published source for all this stuff. So when the son of the restaurant owner for a much beloved and now closed restaurant showed up randomly on the site to tell the history of how all the football players in town used to go to this restaurant and how his dad used to tease them and make sure that they were doing this, like, you know, something from heaven. And if that had showed up on Wikipedia, it would be deleted immediately for 5 reasons. You know, it wasn't, it's original research, it's not very important, it's, you know, whatnot. So we're just proud of having a spot where people can drop things that are relevant to the place. So some of the advantages of being around for a long time, ArborWiki's been around since 2006. So we've gotten to the point where we don't really need to do outreach into town, because at some point along the way, we've told enough people about the most popular pages on the site that we don't need to. This is the single most popular page in the site. It's not social justice, it's not grand plans, it's things to do on your birthday, page after page. I'm just going to keep scrolling, of restaurants and cafes and everyone who will give you a good deal on your birthday. And this is updated. This has been updated over 500 times. It gets typically an editor, and this is like 7 edits, 10 edits a week, of people updating things. You know, they went someplace, they're no longer offering that, the place closed down. You know, just this sort of small but important part of what happens to a city where people are using their city, and where people have an opportunity to edit their city because they're keeping track of things. So we don't have to, I don't have to do outreach to talk about that ArborWiki exists, because 1/3% of the town has a birthday on any given day. And chances are, if they search for Ann Arbor birthday, they're going to find something that I've done, or that I've helped do, or that I've helped facilitate getting done. The other thing that's been a real tremendous advantage of being around for a long time is we've gotten past the point where we have had to depend on our own resources to do things. And particularly, we've gotten a tremendous amount of institutional support from the Ann Arbor District Library. They have a community hosting service, so we get free hosting from them. They build a virtual machine for us, provide technical support for that to the extent that we need it, take care of backups for us, other sorts of things that you would otherwise need to do if you were running your own system. So, you know, at least that saves $10 a month. What it really saves is that big technical overburden of making sure that you're capable of actually running a server. And I don't want to, it's not an official project of the library, but I don't want to underestimate how much credibility it gives you in the community to say, oh, well, it's hosted at the library. It's like, oh, you're doing something that has gotten recognition, right? It's important. But there's challenges to a system that's been around for a long time. You notice when Philip was doing the talk about other cities and how wonderful their new projects were, there wasn't a picture of ArborWiki with 15 people around the table. Because, you know, it was 6 people around the table 6 years ago, and it was 4 people around a different table 4 years ago. gotten the whole gang together because it's been a much more distributed effort. There's not that new wiki smell. There's not that empty, vast sea of pages that you're just waiting to write about. You know, there's a page already for most of the parks. The park project has been sort of done. You could make it better, but it's sort of done. So it's reached that stage where you can't count on the initial barn-raising energy to keep it going. It needs to be something else. The core of regular contributors is relatively small compared to the total number of pages. So the total number of pages is on the order of about 10,000 or so. So if you really wanted to update every page once a year, you'd have to get 30 new edits every day. And that's a lot compared to the number of people who are working on it. So some of these pages are getting kind of old. They're not being updated very much. Now, some of them don't need to be updated very much. When you write the history of a tornado that happened in 1903, you don't need to rewrite the history of the tornado that happened in 1903 very often. But if you're trying to keep track of people who are in the news or people who are in local politics, you really want to have that perpetual refreshment of like, who is this person this year? And we're challenged to keep things up. And one of the things that I think is also a real challenge is that there's, and I'll take complete blame for this, there's too many pages that are too short, too uninformative, that don't have a map, that don't have a picture, that might not have a paragraph, that just might be a sentence long, where there's this very broad sense of, oh, we've got 10,000 pages about our town. But if you go deep into any of them, you don't always find encyclopedic content. You sometimes find extremely brief information. So I'm going to go down here. And one of my collaborators on this, whenever he sees a short page on his wiki, he says, oh, Ed's been around editing what we're doing again. So similarly, we don't have as many photos as we would like to. There are some photos in the system, but there's like not a picture of every person who's notable, or in there, there's not a picture of every park, there's not a picture of every, you name it, there's not a picture of it, you know, for a large class of things. And then I want to mention one real interesting problem about location. So it's called ArborWiki, so it's about Ann Arbor, but Ann Arbor is not the only town in the area. There's a neighboring town, Ypsilanti, which has its own university, is older than Ann Arbor, has a lot of civic pride, and I would love to have all of the civic energy that has gone into building up the digital version of Ypsilanti incorporated into ArborWiki. But when you bring ArborWiki into this community and you say, we want you to participate in the project, they say, well, that's your project. That's not our project. And it's a divide. I don't know what kind of divide it is. It's not a digital divide because there's technical people in both places.
Status divide.
There's something about having the big university town write about things in the neighboring factory town that doesn't seem right. And it's not that there's two organizations at the same level. It's a challenge. So at some point that needs to be addressed. So then I want to also think about, once you have a sort of mature system, what do you do next, right? You've got 10,000 pages, you've written about your city. What's the next thing to do? What's the next plan? Because just looking at it, it looks like it's sort of done. Not really done, because there are certainly pages, things that you could search for, but you know, we've got a lot here. So what do you do next? So I've been relying a lot on analytical tools to help drive that, because there's too many pages in the system for me to just decide what to do next. I need to have some systematic way of organizing my maintenance and curation and, you know, steady behavior to make things better, knowing full well that if I put energy into it, that to slowly make things better, instead of making things bigger, that over the long period, that's a sustainable strategy. So one of the things I've looked at is simply using Google Analytics to identify the most popular pages on the site and make sure that they're the best pages on the site, right? The things to, and some of the pages that are most popular, I showed you the birthday deals page. There's a page on volunteer opportunities, for youth and teens. A collection of things that you can do, that your teenager can do over the course of a summer. It's a really long, perhaps partially out of date, very popular thing which we get searches for all the time and people look at routinely. It's had contact information. It's got a lot of people's names in it, so these are people to do outreach to. It's a good thing to have it, and it would be better if it was better, right? We get a fair amount of traffic to the things to do with your kids page, and I know that that page could be 1,000 times better because I've got kids. Another thing that I've been able to do is using Google Analytics, look for the times where you type in a page name, the page is not found. So if I was going to type in eChicago here, I know that that doesn't exist. Doesn't exist yet, right? If this was important, and I'm sure it will be, because I'm sure I'll be posting something from this or something next to it. You can run a report in the analytics software that just looks for pages with the title of page not found. And that gives you an idea of what people have been visiting that doesn't exist yet. And just you go back and you backfill things that either were there, either people were linking to because there was a typo, or people were looking for that you had linked to that didn't exist yet, or that they were searching for and just didn't find. So there's this sense of, a friend of mine, Pete Kaminsky, refers to it as incipient links. The things that you link to that you wish were there, the aspirational, like I wish I had a page about so-and-so, but I don't have it yet, but I'm still going to pretend as though I did. And then you go back to the page not found report and look for that. I wish that LocalWiki, and I've been able to do this with scripts, but had just a random page function, like show something random from your site, make it better. You could always make something better, even if it's just to delete it, if it's not very good. We've learned from doing this for a number of years that there's a seasonal rhythm to the site. The Halloween page gets visited near Halloween and not very much the rest of the year. If anyone is from Chicago, they know about Punchki, jelly donuts that are celebrated. Actually, this is a Hamtramck, Michigan thing, but that's sort of spread to greater southeastern Michigan and the Polish community than anyone in the donut eating community. Where to get them, and this is culture, right? So where to get them, and what people are doing this year, and this year's prices, or maybe last year's prices if you didn't get to it. Who makes them fresh and who brings them in from somewhere else, and where to go on your field trip, and just like much more authoritative than you would ever think you would need. But I know that every year people are going to find this, because last year, for the week or so leading up to Punchki Day, the searches started coming in. So it's like, all right, time to figure out who's bringing in the. And we've had some fun with ArborWiki. There's a very thorough accounting of donuts in the area. There's actually a page just called Donuts. Oops, that I can't find. With the big word map of all the donut stuff that's in the area, and the outrageous statement ripping through the fabric of Ann Arbor, real donuts are not available. So this is part of like this, the group of people working on it had some fun with doing it, and I think that's clear from doing it, from looking at it. I've also found So with the absence of a local newspaper, some local reporting isn't getting done. And fortunately, there's a group of people that's getting larger who are following city council meetings because they're being broadcast online through the city public access cable network, to the point where there's a couple of things happening. One, we're having meetings at a local bar that is broadcasting city council online, and we have our political discussions over beer while everyone else is sitting on hard benches at City Hall. But just to be able to follow council meetings in real time, if some project is mentioned, if someone is talking about a development project at a certain place, that you can say to the Twitter stream of people who are following along, oh, they're talking about this project, it's at 413 East Huron Street, and here's here's the history of that site, everything we know about from now, and we'll edit it in real time to reflect who's discussing things. And that sort of real-time public engagement, it doesn't engage a lot of people, but it's really core to what's going on in the town. The challenge, I think, of looking at a big system, and I don't want to say that 10,000 pages is big, because if Chicagoland, Greater Chicagoland, had 10,000 pages, you'd sort of just be getting started. If you had a page for every notable person in the area, for every business that anyone ever wanted to go to again, for every neighborhood and all of the issues that are going on in each neighborhood, it's much bigger than that. So just because I live in a relatively small area, I say, well, 10,000, that's a pretty good take on things. 10,000 pages for 200,000 people, that's a good ratio. But I think at some point you recognize what the natural size is of the project that you're trying to do, and you try to look not just going for quantity as a measure of success, but also quality as a measure of success. And it's probably, if I had to say, what's the next 10-year plan for this, or 5-year plan, or 3-year plan, if I could every day hit a button that said, what's the worst page in this whole thing, and how do I make it better? That's probably what I would do. You could hit the button and you say, show me something awful. And I'll say, oh, if that was really awful, can I make it better, or do I just delete it and hope we start over again? Not to wipe out history, not to wipe out knowledge, but just to acknowledge that in any project that's gone on for a while, there's some parts of it that are relatively abandoned, and that feel abandoned, and that you'd be embarrassed to show someone. You want to improve on that. I'd also say that paying attention to traffic patterns, again, as you start to get something that's larger, if you're running a LocalWiki and you don't already have some sort of analytics software running, please install it. I'd be happy to help you look at the numbers and look at the pages and whatnot. You start to notice trends, both long-term trends that are up, right, which is great, but also very short-term trends that are spiky. Some person who you've written a page about is suddenly in the news, and suddenly the thing that was the placeholder is now on the front page of Google searches for this person, and you want to say, oh, that's noteworthy, right? That mayoral candidate suddenly was newsworthy for some other reason. Let's make sure that we bring that up to date with what's going on. We've been lucky in a large sense. The Ann Arbor blogging community is pretty strong. There's people writing about what's going on in town, not just what's left of the local newspaper, but also a new news organization that has showed up that just reports in incredible detail about public meetings. They'll go to a city council meeting and write 10,000 words. They'll go to a city council, they'll go to a public meeting this is the Ann Arbor Chronicle, they'll go to a public meeting that was adjourned and didn't take place because of lack of quorum, and still managed to write 4,000 words about the meeting. And The only thing that stumped them, there was a citizens filibuster. There was a public meeting where I wrote it up because it was so noteworthy. It took 5 hours to listen to public commentary at a recent city council meeting because there were 2 public hearings on the agenda, both of which had participants who wanted the city council to postpone their decision. So they brought all of their allies in to speak on each of these, one of which had 40, one of which had 50 participants. And that's something that needs to be commemorated because that's part of history. Because people were using those words, right? That's the language of things. So in conclusion, it's been a great project. It's been going on for long enough that it feels like it's been a couple of different projects. It takes a little bit of time every day or every week to work on. It's not a model for every organization or for every city because it's started out long enough ago that I think you might use a different model. But as these projects mature, some of the things that we have seen are going to be showing up in something else. And when your city is lucky enough to have something that's been going on for 5 years, you probably say, "Oh, I remember Ed saying that some of it's going to look old at some point. I need to fix it." So, thanks very much.
Hey.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Is that okay?
Yeah, you can come down more.
Thank you. Sure. Hi, I'm Rubayya. It's been a great time hearing from other people who are involved in LocalWikis today as somebody who worked on a LocalWiki as a class project. So you'll be hearing about my experience. My background is that I'm a master's student at the Graduate School of Library Information Science, and my community informatics class with Kate Williams was assigned to work on the CUWiki. And it's been great hearing from Ed so far because ArborWiki was one of our inspirations that we looked to. We thought, hey, this is a really polished looking wiki. They're doing some pretty cool things. Let's see if we can imitate some of those things and make them work for us. And it's also been great hearing from Phil Newstrom. We also spoke with him in our class once, and hearing about the new development possibly about the LocalWiki hub is especially exciting because if we'd been able to connect with Ed somehow with other people who are working on local wikis, it's really helpful to have a community of local Wikians when you're trying to build a local community. So very exciting development. So getting into my experience working on the CUWiki. First, I want to ask you a couple of questions that they're not the only things that come up and that you think about when you are working on the local wiki, but one of the things that's harder to address, I think. And I'm going to try to get to address it to the best that we did as a class and as a group working on the wiki. So my first question is, what makes you feel ownership of anything? Just things that you have. What makes you feel like you own it? And then after that, what makes you feel that way about a place? Any place. The place you live, the place you grew up. What makes you feel like it's yours? And then my third question is, when you are online, on the internet, different types of ways that you interact, different pages you use, different websites, do you ever feel like those are yours? And what makes you feel that way? The question of ownership of something, a place, and a website, which is like a place online. And then the most important question, how is that similar or different to owning something as a community? Not just your own ownership of something, but your ownership with a lot of other people who are invested in something with you. So this was something that philosophically it wasn't at the forefront when we were working on the wiki and doing edits, getting information, but I feel like it was something that was looming over us or behind us a lot of the times. So I'll try to talk about that. Okay, so you know our background. Or the background that I came from working on this as a master's student. Everyone else in the class was from the same background. Let me tell you a little bit more about it. We didn't know what a local wiki was when we were first given this assignment. Kate Williams said, hey, we're working on this for our class, and we're all going to be responsible for making pages on this wiki, and you'll all have to make an X number of pages. So we said, okay, we'll make pages. So not really knowing what the software was something we had to overcome. Also, as master's students, most of us are not Champaign, Urbana residents. So we don't live there. We don't know that much about it. A lot of us were first semester students. We just moved there. And so we had that to overcome as well. But in those, it actually ended up being a way that we connected with the people that we wanted to get on board with the wiki. So how did that happen? First of all, when we would go out, so the first assignment that we had to go out to, as Brian Zella mentioned, the farmers market, and so local business people. And the idea was that local business people need as much exposure as possible. So this is a great place to start. It'll be free advertising for them. And they are there on Saturday mornings. We can just go and talk to them. There are a lot of people there. It won't be weird. It was a great setup. So we went and talked to people, and usually what we would encounter, and a lot of the people we were talking to were farmers who work with the earth. They don't work with computers so much, and they told us that. And so a lot of them didn't know what a wiki was, and a lot of them asked, well, do I have to pay for that? How much will that cost? They wanted to know who was going to keep the information current, because it wasn't going to be them. They didn't have the time or necessarily the skills. So we realized that that was going to be our responsibility, or people that we could hopefully find to invest responsibility in this when we would eventually leave, which was most likely going to happen for most of us. So we gathered the information from the local farmers, and then made, and other business people who come to the farmers market, it wasn't just farmers, and made the pages for them. And in doing so, we discovered a lot about, the wiki is really easy to edit. It's a WYSIWYG interface, and it's just like any blog interface, which some of you might know what I'm talking about, but still a lot of people don't know. And there's that initial step of you look at it and you say, I don't know how to do this. I mean, you play around with it a little bit, but even that, not everybody is comfortable playing around with a website, especially when you have so much control over it. And then also, we didn't know who the administrators were. We didn't know that Brian Zella was one of the founders, or that he was behind this. At this point, we'd never interacted with Phil Newstrom yet, and So we didn't have, we have a tags page here. This was something that we requested that they put in because it just made it easier for us to keep track of what we were doing. Things like the recent changes page. We learned to use this as a feed, more or less, to see who was doing what and what was happening recently. And administratively, that is used differently, but as people who are on the side where we don't have administrative power, we used it as a feed. And things like that, that we were learning how to use the wiki, but we were learning how to use the wiki the way that pretty much anybody else would learn how to use the wiki and how they would use it. So this was information we could pass along and not say, if you run into a problem, you'll be able to depend on us to take care of it necessarily. If something happens, and again, when we said, well, we're going to put your information on this site that anyone can edit, one of the concerns was, well, what if somebody puts something bad about my business on there? I don't necessarily want people putting trash on there, or what if somebody tries, one of my competitors, for example, tries to make me look bad. And we said, well, you can keep track of that, and you can always change that. You can even see if this person does have an account, you can even see who made the change. And if the person knew, though, that that was going to happen, they probably wouldn't sign in when they did that. So there is a level of, when you don't have the authority, and you don't have that level of ownership, there's a level of security that's not necessarily there. So we basically, the answer that we had for them was, the best you could do is be proactive and monitor your information under yourself, which wasn't necessarily an option for everyone. And we were all in the same place for that. So the other thing too, I mentioned that one of the challenges we encountered was that we felt like we were only there for 2 years, mostly. Ideally, for a master's student, would be there for 2 years. And we felt that we hadn't been in the community long enough to know what was important about it, what we should invest in. And the truth is, though, we discovered that anybody working on a wiki, the message that you want to send out as a community wiki is not that I'm here to give this to you and I'm bringing you this and it will make your life better. I'm giving you this and you will use it to make your life better. So even if we were going to be around, maybe even the fact that we weren't going to be around was a good thing in working on the wiki, because we didn't feel ownership of it, but nobody really should necessarily feel like it's just theirs. It's something that you're always passing along. And I think that that's kind of what the community ownership aspect of it is. It's not just something you're doing for yourself, it's something you're doing for the people who are coming after you, or the other people who will hopefully take this on as well. So again, while we had that anxiety of this isn't ours necessarily, we're not necessarily part of this community. Who necessarily is part of a community? How do you decide that you're part of a community? You become involved in that community, right? You engage in that community. You make yourself a part of that community. And for a lot of us, working on the wiki engaged us in the community and made us feel more like a part of the community than we had before. So it was actually an incredible opportunity to be able to do it. And you have to get over that fear initially of, I don't belong here, and just decide, I can belong here. and jump in and engage and become part of it. So that was most of what I had to say. Let me just take a quick look at my notes and make sure I didn't forget anything. Oh, the one other thing. So, when you're making a local wiki, you're building the community around you, right? You're looking at the people that need information, and you're looking at all different types of people. And you want the first impulse as people coming from a social justice background is to first address the voices that normally get left out. So this is an alternative source of media, really. It's an alternative platform for expression, and anybody can access it. So why not give that access to people that don't normally get to voice where they're coming from? And of course, that's not, so we face this conundrum of if those are the people that we're going to empower. So for example, the farmers at the farmers market don't get much press, don't get as much exposure for their business. However, they're not going to have the time necessarily. They don't necessarily have the skills to build and maintain the wiki. So the people that you want to have and showcase in the wiki to make sure that their voices are equally heard aren't necessarily the people who are good for the wiki in terms of growth and progress of the wiki. So the idea that I think has to be put forth is that everybody who is involved knows that that's what you want, you know, that you are coming from a social justice background. And so the other people that you involve, who should be involved, because really a community is made of all different types of people and all the different types of voices, and that sense of this is for everybody, that has to come through. So everybody involved can make sure that all the other people are involved. And of course, you can slowly involve the people who wouldn't normally at first step up and build the wiki, and they can learn how to do it. It's not that hard. It won't take that long. And eventually, they can do it themselves too. But there's that gap or that place in between where there are going to be the people who are building the wiki who are not necessarily the people who you want the wiki to empower. Which brings me to the final point that I wanted to make, which is that one day we did have Phil Newstrom call in, and we talked to him, and we found out that the Davis Wiki took about 5 years or so to take off, right? And then speaking eventually with other people, we found out that other wikis were not built in a semester. And it takes time for all the different pieces to come together, for all the people who are really going to build the wiki and make sure that it thrives, to get on board and find out that it exists, find out what it can really be used for, and then embrace it and make it what it can really be. So to future local Wikians, do not despair, take some time. And that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Well, what interesting talks. I think that what we need to do is not only interrogate the two local wiki presentations, but to think now, where do we go from here? And I'd like to make a first proposal. And I'm speaking now out to the local Wikians and us here. And my proposal is we need music and we need a dance. So when people get socially, it's about let's do the wiki. Just a proposal, just to think about. I don't know where dances come from, but you know, if we get everybody thinking about it, you know, let's do the wiki. You know, it sounds right. You know, okay. So that's just an idea. The floor is open.
So are you in Champaign, Urbana now?
I am.
Yeah, I remember one of the classes was never, they were like a distance class. Yeah, I remember, I was like, this is very odd.
It must have been even weirder for them because they were also responsible for making the pages, but they were all distance learning class. So what they ended up doing was phoning and calling local businesses and then putting information up from those phone calls because they weren't even in town to go and visit.
Yeah.
One of the things that we did in Champaign, Urbana was to have sort of a sectoral approach. And the idea was, you know, what community is likely to take this up? The first group that came to mind, restaurants. You know, because they have menu changes, they're very sensitive to what people are saying. And one of the things we said was, look, in the pre-LocalWiki days, how do you stop a rumor? Somebody goes to your restaurant, there's a cockroach in the salad, and they start calling all their friends saying, don't go there, don't go there. You can't chase after a rumor. But if somebody puts on your LocalWiki, there was a cockroach, they serve cockroaches, you can go and change that. So this is actually an improvement upon gossip.
I mean, and what you say, I mean, it's an interesting point, and it suggests an alternative strategy, perhaps a road not taken, but one to consider for the future. So you chose, so the decision was to start with having businesses represent themselves, but in order for the scenario that you just outlined to be plausible, it would be more perhaps productive to have customers represent the business, because when customers are representing the business, that's when the businesses are interested, but before the customers are there, then the businesses perhaps maybe not as interested. So, and that goes back to your question of property and ownership. So who owns a local business? Is it the people who have the legal title to the business, or is it the people who go to the business and ensure its economic viability? So, I mean, I think it would be, I mean, you may have had a different result if you, instead of going to the farmer's market and talking to the farmers, talk to the people who are at the farmer's market buying things.
That's an excellent next step.
Yeah.
Because, you know, if we can, I mean, we don't have as much sort of Wi-Fi as would be good, but that's an excellent suggestion for the farmer's market this year. If all of the vendors have pages now, we can now talk to people and get various suggestions as to how to, you know, expand. And also there's this point about popularity. There's certain parts of the farmer's market that are absolutely the places where everybody goes. The guy brings in a big trailer full of corn, and it's the best corn, you know, and everybody's just crawling into this thing to get their ears. And obviously it's Illinois, so there's a lot of corn. But that's really exciting. And then there are a couple of bakeries, and there's wonderful cheese producers. Anyway, so they're really key aspects to that are really part of the identity. We don't have the deli that you have in Ann Arbor,
Right.
But we got a few things, and people love those things, and they identify with them. But that, to me, is that one of the big questions of the LocalWiki is, how do you produce content that people identify to answer Rubayya's question, that they feel this is ours, this is our community. And so partly it's what topic, partly it's the voice of the entry. You know, what do you think about that?
I think one of the things that has given people a sense of, to the extent that people do have a sense of ownership about ArborWiki, is a couple things. One is we have a couple of very long pages with lots of opportunity for people to add to. So again, I'll come back to birthday deals as the sort of canonical version of that. Anyone can go into that, and it's pretty clear from the surrounding context what you would need to do to make that page a little bit better. The other thing is that we've attracted enough people who are willing to have a distinctive voice on the system, so that when you read what they have to say, it doesn't sound like a dry recitation of facts. It doesn't sound encyclopedic. There's a certain shared sense of tone to it. And those pages are the ones that I enjoy telling people about.
Mm-hmm.
It's the donuts page as opposed to some motel, right?
Mm-hmm.
We do a reasonable job at collecting reviews from folks. Just to answer the restaurant question, who owns it? There's enough local restaurant reviewers who get published in local magazines or newspapers that I'm not hesitant to claim fair use and clip out a short paragraph about that, so that the page becomes some sort of collective voice of a couple of published things. And then once someplace closes down, it's, anyone fending for themselves. The restaurant owner is no longer there. So it becomes a community history of what was this place like. And then you can say, well, it really started going downhill, and not be shy about that because you're not criticizing something that's there. So.
I'd like to ask Rubayya, your experience as a master's student in dealing with this. Clearly you're going on to a career. Are you taking the LocalWiki experience as part of your toolkit and your professional career objective? So if you land in Moline, Illinois, or Paris, France, would you think about creating a LocalWiki based on your experience?
Absolutely. I think that if one didn't exist where I went, and I wanted to become more involved in the community, especially as a librarian, if I was, for example, a public librarian somewhere, I think that a great way to keep pulse on the community and to get to know a community is through a local wiki and through building a local wiki and being involved in one. And I think that, if anyone here is aspiring to be a librarian or anyone listening, then it's a good tool for a librarian to have and use. And anyone who cares about their community, anyone who is social justice-minded and wants to be engaged in their community, LocalWiki is a great way to make that happen. And in terms of community organization too, you really learn who you should go to when you want to know what's going on, or who to go to when you want to involve a lot of people, and that's good. That's an important thing to know.
One of the most impressive things I've seen at this conference so far was yesterday, the folks who were talking about researching TIFF and doing community-based walkarounds. And I noticed there's something a little bit different, not necessarily opposed in the way they're talking about using these tools. They're forming identity and sort of shared knowledge among a specific group. Whereas here you have people saying, this is important to me and it could be important to anyone. But it's really the relationship between an individual and the whole city as a collective. Have you seen groups using this tool specifically to chart their own developing identity?
I think you might have a better answer to this than I do. I just wanted to put out, though, that we really hoped that there would be groups who would start using the wiki, and we felt like that would be a good way for it to take off. If people who already had a set identity use this as a platform to further that identity. So.
Yeah, the example of a group that I know that's used a LocalWiki as a platform, right, rather than building their own website or before building their own website, happened in Detroit on DetroitWiki. where a group of folks called the Detroit Sound Conservancy started collecting information about historical and current music, the historical and current music scene, including documentation for buildings that were part of the local music scene that are still in existence today, but that are threatened or endangered or in bad shape. And Carlton Goals, I think is his name, who did that. And I spoke with Carlton. I drove to Hamtramck and we had coffee together. And he was ambivalent about it because he was saying, well, should we build our own website because we could have a lot more control over it? Should we use this? Is this going to be around in 5 years? Right? Are we going to waste our time on it? And I was able to reassure him as best I could that no, from what I knew of the project, this was a long-term strategy, not a short-term strategy. It's always a little bit dangerous to put all your eggs in someone else's basket. And so I think that groups trying to build a group identity, need to take a multi-pronged approach to things, right? Not just rely on one thing, but make use of every group forming tool that's available to them. Have a Facebook group, have an active presence on Twitter with followers, have local wiki pages for the things that you care about that are under the umbrella of stuff that you want to have the final say on or have the authoritative voice for. So, groups have a lot of opportunities in this day and age on the net, and I think that Wiki is sort of the second choice maybe, or the third choice for building group forming things, because it doesn't have a communication structure, more of a reference structure.
Okay, before I recognize Shamim for a question, I want to kind of focus our discussion with something that we talked about yesterday before. We just have a few more minutes left, actually 10 minutes or so, and I think it's important to get some feedback on this. We all know, as a result of the previous session and this session, how important really the local wiki is and the experience. And at eChicago, we have now had a focus on local wiki now for a couple of years. And we wanted to think about using eChicago as a venue for an even larger focus on the local wiki. And so one of the issues is we wanted to raise the possibility, and I'm speaking to the audience who's out there in cyberspace as well as those of us in this room, about the possibility of eChicago being a venue for a national gathering of local wiki Wikipedians or Wikians. What's the correct way to say that, Phil?
I don't really know.
Okay. That will be an agenda item next year. Figure out what to call ourselves. But I'd like to get some feedback about that. Now, another important announcement is we're not going to be here at UIC next year. Next year, eChicago is going to be in the Cultural Center in the downtown area of Chicago. And so we're going to be really in the heart of the city. And so we're going to try to reach out more broadly to the neighborhoods to get a more Chicago feel to this conference. I'm from Chicago, and there is a feel to Chicago, and we want that. And so I just wanted to make sure that everybody was thinking of that possibility and think about that in any final comments you have, because obviously such an undertaking would involve a lot of time, with a lot of convincing people. Every wiki that's been started hasn't necessarily been as current, and so we're going to have to bring people back, and bring new energy to it. So I think that's a consideration. Sure.
Yeah, so I think it's a follow-up with the Rubayya's comments. So and maybe my question would be for both of you, but your comment on the feelings of the community, whether I belong to this community or own of this community. So my first question is that, do you guys think if even I feel that I own or I belong to this community, is it sufficient enough to edit, to go to the local wiki page? Even I have that skill. You think like that feelings is sufficient enough to go to that local wiki to edit some page? So why I'm saying that, like, I'm wondering, like, if there was no assignment in the class, how many students voluntarily will go there to learn by themselves how to edit that, and they will get some own pages. So my point is that perhaps like there should have some kind of like recognition, which might help, because for the students it was they can gain the like assignment points or something score. Can we incorporate some kind of recognition, like editor of the week or editor of the month, like who have the very most quality, the page which is the most quality things, or like popular pages? Can we incorporate something like that to encourage people who have the feelings, have the capability, but didn't have the motivation to edit the page? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'd say my perspective on that is that when I see someone come in and create a new page or do some edits on it, there's a lot of opportunities to use that as a stepping stone for further publicity for that new piece of knowledge or new piece of content. So when, and it might be a small change, it might be a big change, use that as the stepping off point to publicize that work and acknowledge publicly the work that someone else has done. So this is going to be the loop between LocalWiki edits and so some of the social media thing. Someone edits a page and you say, that was great, here's something updated, acknowledge them on Twitter, link to their name on Facebook, add it to your Tumblr blog, whatever, and just make that loop complete that says, we acknowledge the hard work that you've done and we want to recognize it.
I should have mentioned this. The reason that when we started working on the CUWiki, all the content that was on the CUWiki before our class took it up was the local history and genealogy project, the eBlack CU, which we heard about yesterday. So the main point of our working on the wiki was to build up some content and get it rolling. And once you have something going, then I think that it sustains itself, and so people would be motivated to add, maybe because they've seen other people have added, and it's a way for them to get the information out there. But if there isn't content already on there, then it doesn't look like it's a viable way to get information out there, right? So I think that in the beginning stages, you do have to have something to motivate people to get it rolling. But then once that's established, it kind of sustains itself, this idea.
So, any takers on any proposals for the future? You got your hand?
Yeah, in a sense it almost relates. I mean, I was going to ask just quickly, since we've heard about experience with a local university, with a local community wiki, any interplay that you've noticed around University of Michigan utilizing, contributing to helping build the local wiki? If so, or even if not, they may even be some people to try to fold into a more broader regional, national meeting in the future.
Yeah, so one of the folks who's been very helpful recently is a fellow who's at the U of M School of Information, who's also the Wikipedian in residence at the Ford Library, the Gerald Ford Presidential Library. And I got invited to speak at a U of M School of Information conference there, and had a room about this size with about this many people in it, talking about local wikis and how it worked there. So there's not institutional support in the same way that the library really has skin in the game and institutional staff who are tasked to it. But the university is so integrated with the town that it's kind of hard to not point to half the people who are working on it and have them have some sort of tie to it. It's just harder as a relative outsider to figure out who would care enough on an individual level to buy into it at the level of having an entire class assigned to work on it. It's like that's either going to happen or it isn't. I'm not the decision maker in terms of university priorities.
Any other feelings about the future?
So I think a big local wiki gathering would be fantastic. I mean, I obviously haven't had the resources or the time to really throw into helping with getting a bunch of people to come to this, unfortunately. But soon we will hopefully have that and can hopefully try to get more of that together. And I think even if it was just the next eChicago, we got more people would be great. But I think also like a big event that's focused on local wiki. We get people from all over the world, people from Japan, and like there's just some logistical stuff we need to figure out. Figure out enough money to get sponsorships or assistance from the people in Japan who have to spend $2,000 or something to fly here. And stuff like that, which is a lot of work, but I think we're definitely at the stage where it would be really beneficial. And I mean, I'm going to share this video with everyone once it's posted, because I think this is just really fantastic to hear from people. And I'm sure that we had 20 times the amount of people who would be even 20 times as great. So
Yeah, what we've discovered really is that everything takes time and money. But you have to set a goal. And unfortunately, the way the society is organized, many people don't set goals. They let grant guidelines set their goals for them. And I think it's important for us to flip that script and decide that we're going to do something and then go out to make it happen. Because what we're trying to think about in terms of eChicago is not just Chicago either, but this is now a venue that we can use. And of course, the more we get information from outside of Chicago, the more all of that is infused into Chicago. So it's not a contradiction that is in any way negative. So when we start talking about eChicago for next year, we really would like the planning, as always, for good planners, the activity starts the next day. We start planning eChicago 2014 tomorrow, and it would be great. So just know there's an open invitation to have a major meeting and with a lot of hands-on activity. And I guess if you gather the local Wikipedians together, they're coming with their tools and they're going to do their thing, and that'd be great. We had last year before last, we had a focus on hip hop, and there were speakers. But the next time, we're actually going to have tools and examples, and actually make some tracks and so on. So we want to overcome the theoretical by having the theory and the practice of it. Noah, you had a question? Okay.
Yeah, so regarding the global thing, like the local wiki, we have more international right now, but as you said, they might have some logistic issue or budget issue. So I saw like in some computer science conference that some people, due to visa issues, they can go to the conference, but they normally do the presentation by Skype. And the people, they can ask the questions, whatever they want. So can we do like, for instance, Japan, the local wiki? Because I want to know what they're thinking, what their challenge is, because we want to make it global. And why I'm saying that, because when I see the local wiki here, I know that this is not the same challenges I will face in my own community, and I'm pretty much sure Japan has their own challenges, China has their own challenges. I want to know what they're thinking. Since we have some budget issues, or maybe why don't we like incorporate that? We can invite them, maybe we can Skype them, like why don't you present your challenges, what will be your presentation, and we can ask your question from here. In future, maybe when it will happen that we can have some sufficient budget, we can invite them, but maybe for next year, we can do some Skyping.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. The one thing though is I think there is value in being in the same place with someone, you know, so that you can, beyond the formality of a presentation, right? It's more about like, you know, having the, you know, the conversation that, you know, you're not allowed to have or whatever, you know, talking about whatever it is. And I think that would be really, really valuable too.
Yeah.
So it'd be good. I think we could do something like, in the past, I think we've done 2 little Google Hangouts with different LocalWiki communities, and we're going to start those up again, or someone should start those up again. But you know, stuff like that is good, but it's always kind of like a little removed from the physical presence, which is.
Well, we've done it in the past. We had a conference, in fact, there's a proceedings out there where we had a conference on the 1980 census and the undercount. Nobody would give us money. And so we organized the universities, and every university came up with a ticket. So I think there's a lot of ways to do things. It would be wonderful if Mellon wrote a check, or if Ford wrote a check. Wonderful. And if you're out there, we're asking for the check. But the reality is that we have enough people, including Ann Arbor, to be able to fly somebody in from Japan and anywhere else for that matter. So again, there's more than one way to skin a cat. There's more than one way to have a conference. And that includes all the tools that are available to us as people who used all these tools. And the interesting thing about the LocalWiki is that right now, in September, is the end of the BTOP money. That's $7 billion that was rolled out. The whole country is dealing with it. And it seems to me that the real question now is, since most of the money went into infrastructure and underground, what are going to be the killer apps? What are going to be the way in which the community grasps the digital capacity that's now had a major increase in the country? And this includes rural areas as well as urban areas and so on. We just heard in an earlier session that the smart communities that was built by BTOP money is now being augmented by $50 million to roll it out to 9 big communities around the University of Chicago. And the question is going to be, what are people going to do in those very communities? And if they got a hold of the LocalWiki, and by the way, Hyde Park is a center where University of Chicago is, but some of those other areas really get into the heart of the black community on the south side, the historic community, 1st Congressional District, and so on. So the question is, the historic base of Harold Washington, which represents the politics of a different Chicago than one exists today. And the question is whether or not, if people were able to have something like the LocalWiki, what would that do for the memory, since that community is now being gentrified, and the vacant lots are being slicked back so people don't remember the bar on the corner where everybody used to go, and the history of that community where the black trade unionists and the heart really of how Chicago organized for the March on Washington. I mean, we sent 2 trainloads of people, several planes, bunch of buses, etc. This is the, you know, the real history of achievement is going to end if the people and the families are not given an opportunity to tell their story. And I'm not sure that there's any other technology that's comparable to the LocalWiki for us to achieve this. So it's something to think about as we go forward. Any last comments that I will offer? Any last comments?
I got a question.
Yeah.
When you take eChicago, say something, eChicago, one venue, what do you like?
One of the bars. What's a venue you might be talking about?
How about the University of Illinois?
No. What's a venue? I think he's asking. That's getting torn down.
Right.
Yeah, one of these bars that are getting torn down that were on the that was a part of the history.
Well, on 43rd Street, there was a bar called Brownies. And this was a very important bar because a lot of the people who lived in the area worked in the stockyards. And as the stockyards goes down, as the steel mills in southeast Chicago go down, then a lot of people who were previously employed but moved to other areas would come back to this bar. They tore the bar down, and then there were barrels, these big barrels that people would put wood in and heat, and people would gather around the barrels in the wintertime. And then the police, because of the way the drugs were being sold in the community, and people who were outside the community were coming in to sell the drugs. So that people, for example, from the 40s and 50s who had been on heroin for 40 years in the community were now being killed because they had a $10 debt with these drug dealers who were coming in from other places. And the police had run out everybody else, and here are these dudes on the corner, you know, the kind of dudes in the middle of a snowstorm or standing on the corner for commerce. So what we're talking about is how does the community represent itself
I do remember something like that. There's no.
and resist the idea of total gentrification, you know, community development without people, and certainly without the people who used to live there. Because community development in Chicago means you move them out, send them to the southern suburbs, and bring in a new group of people, and you call that development. Yeah, I'll get to you later on, but I mean, I think everybody understands what I'm trying to say here. Because Harvey, Dixmoor, those suburbs used to be autonomous industrial suburbs. They weren't bedroom suburbs. Now, because those industrial sites are gone, they've taken the people from the south side of Chicago and the west side of Chicago and warehoused them out there so that they can gentrify the inner city. That's what's happening. And if we don't figure out a way to remember Chicago, we're going to have to deal with the contradictions that will reverberate through the next couple of generations. Because the two Chicagos that we find, that is to say, the people who live in the bubble, you know, the creative class, the latte class, that group, us, versus the majority of people in Chicago who are experiencing deindustrialization. Steel mills no longer employ people. The deindustrialization is the crisis of Chicago. And the young people today are 2 generations away from that Chicago and don't understand it and don't know it. And so we really are in a situation here. What is the future of Chicago? I grew up in Chicago. So there's a certain sense I have a right to speak about Chicago because I see what's happening. I grew up in Cabrini. Cabrini was low-rise public housing as what? As support for war workers. My father was a steel worker at National Marble Steel in Cicero. That was one generation. It was 1940s. It was multinational. On my block were black people, Filipinos, and white people, and Irish, the real Irish, red hair. Now, then they built Green, the high rise. That was to warehouse people who were on welfare. Totally different social composition. And so now what they've done is torn down the high-rise warehousing, the Robert Taylor homes, the Green of Cabrini Green, and so on. What happened to those people? They dispersed them and sent them out to bedroom suburbs for Chicago, bedroom only, in the fact that their welfare checks come from somewhere else. So see, Chicago is raw. It's not a tourist place like New York or Frisco. This is the throwdown. Mississippi for the South, Chicago for the industrial. And that's the reality. Black people came from Mississippi, white people came from Mississippi too. So this is an interesting, we call the Mississippi River the aorta of the American experience. Anyway, it's something to think about. But here we are, The future is for us, and I hope the future is local wikis everywhere. Thank you.
What about area that you were,
We have